You're now listening to Alpha Leak, a podcast mini-series highlighting the most under-the-radar projects and developments in crypto. And this series is brought to you by the Blockcrunch podcast. I'm your host, Jason Choi. I'm a general partner at Spartan Capital and an active DeFi angel investor. Nothing on this show should be construed as financial advice, and my guests, myself, and my employer may hold positions in assets discussed on the show. And if you'd like for your project to be featured on this series, reach out to me on Twitter at Mr. Jason Choi. This episode of the Blockcrunch podcast is brought to you by CoinFlex and PARASWAP. Stick around to learn more. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Blockcrunch podcast. Now, lately, I've been getting really deep into music NFTs after my interview, which capped off last year with Sinister Gates from Avenged Sevenfold. And I've been really astounded by just how disruptive this idea of musical NFTs is to labels, because artists are making more from one single mint than they do in millions and millions of streams. And lately, a good friend of mine introduced me to a very bright team called Decent, which is building a decentralized music label. So I'm super excited to have the entire Decent team on to talk about the future of music NFTs. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks
Happy
for
to
having
be here.
us.
So just to start us off, I know there's three of you. I know there's four co-founders, but three of you made it today. Can we just go around briefly and just let everybody know your names and your role so that we can associate a name with a voice?
Yeah, sure thing. I can kick it off. So my name is Charlie Durbin. I'm one of the co-CEOs of Decent. Um, I graduated from Princeton in 2019 with a degree in econ and spend a lot of time here working on sort of the platform economics and some of the front end development.
And I'm Will Collier, one of the two Wills on the team. I'm also co-CEO with Charlie. I spend my time on a lot of external partnerships, artist relations, and strategy. But I also am a recent graduate of Brown University, where the other two co-founders also.
And then I'm Will Canteros. I'm the second half of the Will duo. I'm the CTO here at Decent. Have been building out a lot of the back end and some of the smart contracts, as well as helping out with Charlie on the front end work. I went to Brown and studied math, CS, and economics there. This would actually be my senior spring at Brown, but I'm taking an indefinite leave to pursue Decent full time.
And am I making this up, or is one of you an artist as well?
Yeah, so that's actually our fourth co-founder, Xander Carlson. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but he does release music under the name Forrester. They are currently signed to Sony's Palm Tree Records, him and his partner David. His experience actually coming up through the music industry, starting as an independent artist, releasing through his own distributor account, going to an independent label, and then ultimately now where he's ended up at Sony. It's something that has been transformative for his mindset around the industry, and something that we have been able to tap into as we build the product and look at how to create more value for artists and disrupt the system as it is.
That's awesome, and I think that fits into this wider theme that we're seeing, right? All these celebrities and artists are moving into NFTs, be it just plain NFT profile pictures or music NFTs. So I guess in that note, can you guys tell us what Decent is and why is now the perfect time to build something like this?
Yeah, so Decent is a marketplace and infrastructure that lets artists commit royalties and list NFTs that fans can purchase to support those artists and ultimately share in their success. As we think about like a comp to the incumbent industry, we like to call Decent a decentralized record label. So our wedge in is funding, but our goal in providing that capital is to uniquely align artists and fan incentives such that we can also reinvent marketing and discovery. I think like why now is actually a super interesting question, because like all music and crypto companies in the space are solving for a very well defined and like frankly old problem, and that is that artists are not capturing as much of the value as they're creating as they should. Like the music industry's economics are fairly extractive and frankly like rent based. I think the solution is also like fairly clear, and you've seen it like play out before in past iterations around crowdfunding, Patreon, and that's like a direct to fan monetization channel does solve this problem. But for that to be successful, like you need two things. The first one being distribution, and the second being monetization. Um, and the distribution capabilities are there and have been there. So those are players like Spotify, SoundCloud, these streaming platforms, and then also like social media on the marketing front that basically let any kid in their basement have the like potential to become a superstar. I think the monetization piece has been trickier in the past and limited to some form of crowdfunding, which frankly just like isn't that profitable in most cases. So now I think like with the advent of Web3 and like widespread adoption, it's kind of the first time that artists really have both the distribution and like a truly efficient like peer-to-peer monetization structure. And I guess I'd point to like even more specifically why now within just the Web3 context is, for artists to actually pursue this strategy, like they need to be able to reach their real fans, and it's hard to do that with DeFi and complex structures and things to understand. But it's not as hard with NFTs, and as NFTs have increased adoption, you've really sort of seen this space come together. And yeah, I think that like we're really excited by the market timing here, in addition to the core offering.
That's amazing, and it's really cool to hear about this packaging royalties for artists into NFT idea. And that reminds me of a tweet that I saw yesterday. I think this is from Vance from Framework Ventures, and he broke down the Web3 music startup scene into one of three categories, or he categorized basically most of the startups he's seen as one of three things. And I'm curious if you guys agree with that breakdown of the space. So essentially, he says there are projects that are packaging royalties as a new asset class, similar to what you guys are doing. And then there are artists, NFTs, and token communities. So these are like Web3 fan clubs, and your membership is determined by your ownership of some asset. And then finally, there's reinventing labels via a DAO structure. It sounds like you guys are doing more than just packaging royalties. There's a hint of the latter two as well. So I'm curious whether you agree with that kind of breakdown of what the music NFT space looks like today, and how you guys would or whether you guys see yourself fit in one of those buckets.
Yeah, I think that it is a pretty good breakdown. We have a few of our own frameworks as well, just sort of also breaking that, segmenting the market by various jobs to be done for artists. Um, I think that with respect to like what decent is and how decent fits into these categories, like we are bringing royalties on chain, but our primary interest in doing so is to like build this intrinsic link between investors' ROI and like artists' quote unquote real world popularity, such that you're like aligning incentives in a pretty powerful way to get artists to, like, for example, market on behalf of the artist, to get fans to, for example, market on behalf of the artist in a way that like they never otherwise would have been incentivized to do. And I think it's like really building in the incentive structure to provide these like services that typically would come from a label, that starts to define like what do these artist DAOs and the disintermediation of a label actually look like. So to that extent, I think that the royalties on chain is like a one sort of vehicle and wedge into the market that we are excited about. But ultimately, it's with like this broader vision of becoming this decentralized record label.
That's really interesting. And I guess zooming out to the artist perspective, why would an artist go with, say, Decent over a traditional label, right? Or is it possible for traditional label artists to also use Decent?
Yeah, one thing that we've seen is, with traditional label structures, there's this imbalance that we've talked about, this imbalance in what artists are able to actually earn in these deals. So for example, an 80-20 split on royalties, or on the master side of rights.
That's a great question. And I think in order to make sure that the comparison is drawn correctly, I think the first place to start with this would be, well, what is a traditional label deal? What would that look like for an artist as compared to Decent? And just to make sure the audience here has the right context, a traditional label deal generally is the label agrees to give an advance or a recording fee to the artist. In return, the label receives 80 to 85% of all of the master rights to the song from the artist in perpetuity. And master rights give them creative control as well as earning power on all the streaming royalties and other revenues from the song. And so on top of that, when the artists get their recording fee, when they get their advance, it's called an advance because ultimately the artist needs to recoup or pay the label back for the total advance. And so what that looks like is, if you're an artist that just got a $100,000 advance and you have 20% of your master rights. The label has the other 80%. What that looks like is you have to pay back that entire $100,000 on just your 20%. So until you pay $500,000 back to the label through your music revenues, you actually don't then end up seeing another cent in your pocket until that is all fully recovered. With Decent, on the other hand, we are enabling artists to relinquish 20, 30, 40% of their rights, commit those to the Decent platform. Ultimately, what they receive as an upfront capital injection comes from the NFT auction that they do for the song. They do not have to recoup any of that money. They keep that and then continue to earn on secondary transactions as well. And another great thing with Decent is we actually we've created a time-bounded aspect to the royalties. And so ultimately, if an artist decides to give their royalties up for 3 to 5 years, rather than in perpetuity, they will actually recover their earning power after that period expires. And so just creating a lot more flexibility as well as upfront capital for these artists while they're continuing to earn on more of their rights throughout the period as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys saw the news with Kanye trying to release Donda 2 on his own platform, which is I think a $200 streaming device or something like that. And I think that speaks a lot to the artist's desire to keep more of the economics to themselves. But I guess the flip side of that is, an artist like Kanye also has a massive, massive profile already, whereas someone who's just starting out might still benefit from a label's distribution as well. So for those type of artists that are thinking, hey, maybe I do need a label to help me get into these shows or to release an album, what is your advice to them?
I would say one sort of combination for success that we've seen is artists actually able to crowdfund or get some of this upfront capital while also maintaining a really great manager and a really great management relationship. I think the ability to hold on to their earnings and hold on to that power while also having at least a professional team around them as well, in their court and working on the tour booking and the other growth opportunities is definitely something that paired together is we've seen as a recipe for success.
Mm-hmm. I think the only thing I would add is I think traditionally when folks think about like crowdfunding and even NFTs, like it's largely in the context of patronage. But that's like a very limited use case and somewhat like shallow one that barely scratches the surface of like what's possible in Web3. So as like particularly when thinking through artist DAOs, I think the question becomes like, why am I setting this up beyond just the financial support? Because that's probably like the easiest service to provide in many respects. And like Will said, like these, managers and tour booking, like those are super valuable services, but they can come from a variety of sources. And it'll be interesting to see, how that materializes in platforms that, sort of push crowdfunding beyond a strictly patronage based application.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it speaks a lot to the actual need for something like this as well. I'm just on your website and looking at some of the artists that are selling their NFTs there. Some of these guys have 50,000 streams on Spotify. So these are, these are artists that are quite popular, and indie artists that already have distribution, and they're just trying to find better ways to, I guess, engage their fans or monetize their fans upfront. So this is super exciting. And I guess on that note, can you maybe walk us through the entire process for an artist that wants to use Decent, right? From the moment they mint to this idea of vaults and kind of how does that all work?
Yeah, 100%. Would be happy to jump in here and talk a little bit more about that. So ultimately, ideally want Decent to be the easiest platform for an artist to take their royalties and engage their fans with very little middlemen and very little additional work on their end. So realistically, the way that this looks is an artist will sign with Decent and commit, a percentage of their total royalties to the Decent platform for N years. So take, Xander Carlson for his Forrester drop that we did in December. He committed 20% of his royalties to the Decent platform for 5 years. And ultimately, all we really need from the artist is a connection and a link to their distributor, and then we can kind of take it from there. So as long as the distributor is sort of giving us this percentage of royalties for these n years, and all that really takes on a lot of these modern platforms is just a click of a button and actually just fitting us into that kind of cap table, we can then take these royalties, put them on chain in the form of stablecoin, and then ultimately stream them into what we've been calling decent vaults. And these vaults are a public accounting mechanism that allow for fans on the decent platform to actually be able to view the number of royalties that are being currently streamed in, and they're able to sort of make rational decisions about how exactly uh, the NFT should be priced, and how what types of rewards they would be getting on these NFTs as well. And then with regards to actually minting and releasing, we currently have been doing a mint mechanism where we simply list 20 NFTs to 50 NFTs per drop and allow fans to buy after a particular date, and then they would then be able to hold on to these while viewing the vaults to sort of view this accrual over time.
And do you envision these NFTs to be completely liquid, like traded at all times, kind of just as an NFT on OpenSea, or how does that work?
Yeah, so currently these NFTs are tradable on OpenSea, as well as you can view them on our platform as well. One of the things that we've really been teasing around recently has been figuring out ways to provide additional liquidity to these NFTs. And something that we've really been teasing around internally has been the idea of bonding curves for NFTs, and almost providing an automated market maker for the NFTs themselves. So theoretically, allowing any user to mint and buy an NFT from our platform at any given time, and ultimately be able to sell it back to the Decent platform along this bonding curve. We really think that it's a really powerful tool that would allow for this instant liquidity, and it's something that really has not been seen much in the music NFT space as of today.
Before I continue, I'd love to share more about our latest sponsor, CoinFlex. Now, CoinFlex is an exchange that's been around for a while. They're actually doing $1.5 billion in daily trading volume right now. Now, recently, their team reached out and walked me through their latest product, the AMM Plus. In short, it lets anybody earn fees as market makers on the CoinFlex exchange simply by depositing their assets. As of this recording, the 7-day in-range average for ETH AMM pool depositors is 82%. So how does this work? If you're familiar with how other AMMs out there work, this is very similar. You can basically select what price range to provide liquidity for, and the UI even shows you your risk under different scenarios. I also love that they have this cross-collateral system, so you can market make in any market you want, using pretty much any collateral you have. If you know how to manage your risks, you can even access up to 10x leverage while providing liquidity. So this is one of the most creative ways I've seen a company borrow elements from DeFi in a centralized exchange setting. So I highly encourage you to check it out at coinflex.com/AMM. I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, SushiSwap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to PARASWAP to scan for the best price anywhere. Because PARASWAP aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out PARASWAP. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. And what I think is really interesting is that, of the hundreds of projects in DeFi that we brought into the show, a lot of their cash flows is completely crypto native, right? You generate a yield based on some crypto native token, and someone's farming that yield on chain. Everything is on chain. Versus now you have royalties where you have to, maybe interface with an artist or an artist manager, and then try to bring that royalty on chain, and try to enforce, that payment on chain. So can you talk a little bit about how do you bridge those royalties on chain, and how do you make sure that people who hold that NFT have some sort of recourse or claim against that royalty?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that from a legal perspective or claims or slash recourse, there is a sort of artist contract that any artist that we onboard to Decent does have to sign, basically confirming that they will pay X amount of royalties for N years, and that contract gets attached to the NFT metadata. So all the fans and NFT holders have access and visibility into it. like the nice sort of parts of, I think, this system from almost like from a trust standpoint as well are, like Will mentioned, these distributor accounts generally are remitting royalties in a fairly automated fashion. So once the artist sets up a split for Decent, like we have visibility to make sure that split is still intact. And I think there's this like third behavioral concept where most of these artists are coming to the platform with like this very well-intentioned nature of trying to engage their community in a way that hasn't really been possible before to achieve this greater outcome. So like there is like sort of this behavioral deterrent where it's unlike we haven't seen large risk of artists reneging because they're really just sort of hurting their own fans and like their top fans at that.
Got it, got it. And how do you I guess how do you negotiate some of these contracts? Is it a standardized contract that every artist signs and then you just put on chain?
That is right. So, like I guess like with respect to negotiation, we are generally trying to have the artists raise an amount in this sort of NFT mint or release that is, directionally proportionate with the amount of royalties that they're listing and the time for which they're listing them. So, with respect, like there isn't a ton of negotiation that goes into the contract, but should an artist want to raise more or less money, those are sort of the levers that they can pull to, update the contract such that it fits their needs.
And given that, I guess it sounds like there's some elements of centralization where you guys are coming in to manage some of these contracts. Is there a path to decentralize the process completely over time?
So I think that is like an accurate step. So right now, like we do have to take those funds into custody, like onboard the artists ourselves. Part of the rationale for doing that is to like maintain this sort of curated initial pipeline of artists, such that we can really put the best foot forward for the artists, the decent community, and decent platform. I think the path to decentralization looks a lot like the fans actually onboarding artists that they would love to see on the platform themselves. To that extent, like when we do think about tokenomics, it's largely solving for the incentives around like fans sort of managing that royalty process. But like we said, that royalty process is fairly straightforward once the fan and artist, have some sort of relationship, and really just entails streaming the money into the vaults. So we do think that, within the next sort of call it 12 months, we would like to decentralize that process a bit more.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess that ties into the next question I had, which is, over the very long term, if we have to zoom out a little bit, if Decent turns out to be a major success, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we're really exploring internally as well is how does this look from a social perspective? Like, how does a fan theoretically curate their own list of NFTs and be able to sort of flex them to the world and say, hey, I own an NFT from Forrester and from Alan Kingdom and from Aisha, and this is sort of these are my artists that I rep and I can support. And I think ultimately that will actually prove to be a very valuable tool from just like a fan interaction perspective, where a fan can theoretically look at the NFTs that they own, really say, hey, I really vibe with these artists. Let me see who the other owners are of these NFTs from these same artists. They can then click on those, profile pages and then view the different fans that also have invested that also have bought NFTs from these artists. And ultimately, we think that this will actually be a really powerful tool that will allow for artist growth and fan engagement to meet one new artist and to continue to support artists that they already like.
Yeah, and it's such a great user targeting tool as well. I think for the NFTs that I bought for Avenged Sevenfold ahead of the interview that I did, they airdropped everyone I think 2 tickets to the next event they're headlining, or 2 NFTs that are claimable for tickets. So to me, that's like setting up a direct distribution channel between artists and their fans. Versus, I think on Facebook, for instance, if you want to target your own followers on your page, for some reason you still have to pay Facebook, which makes no sense to me. But yeah, this is super cool. And to me, I think music NFTs is really obvious to me as a thesis. I'm sure a lot of people might not see it that way yet, given how early we are. But putting yourselves in the shoes of, say, a devil's advocate, what would you say are the biggest reasons that music NFTs might not take off?
I think there's a really big challenge around sort of fan retention, at least with like the current models that we've seen. So like right now, a lot of the music NFT platforms, and like honestly, like our first three drops included, they are sort of capitalizing on this NFT hype cycle in many respects, where the artists are coming to the platform, seeing these, really impressive volumes being done on a lot of these platforms, and making the most of it. But what you really haven't seen a lot yet is like secondary trading, and artists like continuing to and artists and fans continuing to come back and engage past the initial drop. So I think there's like I think most of the platforms in the space like do have an interesting path forward to solve for this, but it'll end up being like the success in that retention vehicle that I think will sort of segment the winners from the losers in the long run.
Yeah, I think another problem that a lot of people are naysayers to the music NFT space usually bring up is the complication and the mess that is the current music and royalty and publishing and sort of the legal side of the incumbent music industry. I think it's such a web of stakeholders, and there are a lot of small pieces of IP and small pieces of different I guess incumbent techniques for collection of all these different revenues that makes it difficult to innovate and to actually move forward with a new system. But there's a lot of really great groups working on different metadata standards, and ultimately, I think there is definitely a future where all of that is done on chain and in a much simpler way, past just what the current industry has.
And I'm sure this is one question that a lot of our degenerate gambler listeners probably are thinking about, right? From the investment perspective, investing in songs, how do you guys envision that will perform? Or has there been kind of historical examples where you guys looked at it and say, hey, this looks like it was a good investment?
Yeah, absolutely. So there actually is sort of a nice comp for market performance, and that's the song royalty funds like Hypnosis and private equity firms that have been buying up these song catalogs for oftentimes between 10 and 20 times revenue multiples over the last, call it, decade or so, in earnest. I think like the stat that I want to say it's like Royalty Exchange and Hypnosis often point to is their song catalogs are typically outperforming the S&P. So I think like what that goes to show is these royalties as an asset class are a viable investment. Um, what is interesting is like then scaling this, like take those examples which are largely sort of blue chip catalogs, these evergreen artists like a Bob Dylan, and what does that look like scaling down to the emerging class of artists, or artists signed to indie labels. I think that like the general trends that like will revert to sort of that mean performance, but it might look a bit more like sort of venture investing, where there'll be a couple of very big outsized winners, a lot that perform to the mean, and then some that don't work quite as well, and um, that should make it sort of interesting to for fans, and really ultimately reward folks that are talented at A&R and discovery.
Yeah, I was really surprised when you guys told me about the existence of these PE firms that are just buying royalties, which I didn't know existed at all. And to me, it's super interesting because compared to, say, modern visual art, where a lot of the value is, I guess, created by a very select few people, right? It's these, um, you know, uh, I guess, art critics or collectors. For music, it seems like it's much more meritocratic because the more people listens to a song, the more royalties there are. So you actually need to almost predict what will become popular or stay relevant after decades. Versus art, you really just need to know, what a few art critics are thinking. So I guess in your example, for Bob Dylan, if you predicted that Bob Dylan would still be a relevant name today, 10, 20 years ago, then you probably would have made a very viable investment. And I guess on that note, right, for you guys, for each of you guys personally, are there artists that you like that if they issued an NFT, you're definitely going to ape into?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would say almost all my favorite artists. I would love to be able to, like imagine just going out to a party and listening to a song on the speaker and being like, yeah, I own a piece of this song. I think that's really just something that like a lot of people can pretty easily imagine. And I think, really be just able to envision for themselves for some of their favorite artists. As someone who loves music, as someone who loves listening to, a lot of these artists, including actually Avenged Sevenfold, I think they're awesome. Just being able to say I own a piece of this, and I'm listening to music right now that I actually am a part of, I think is something that really has people have been unable to do in the past.
I think another use case that people are really excited about is this proof of discovery. Now that you have an NFT that has a purchase timestamped on the blockchain, you can look at the collector history. You can look at who was there at the beginning supporting this artist when they had 100,000 monthly listeners, and now they're at 4 million. It's something that people get excited about, and I even in my friend groups from college and high school, there's always that one person that says, oh, I found Post Malone back when he was on SoundCloud, or I was at the first, Lady Gaga concert. And now there's truly tangible proof of early support and discovery of an artist with these NFTs.
Yeah, for me, if I could own any one song or a piece of it, it would be All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. And not to belabor the question, but I do think you brought up something really interesting with respect to meritocracy in music pricing, and it's like it pairs like uniquely well with NFTs, which is again why I think you've seen this rush of activity in this space. Like when you think of what makes an artist popular, it's really just like the size of their fan base, right? Like there's this herd behavior that like makes or breaks an artist's career, and like ultimately like a lot of how we determine which artists to listen to is like which artists our friends are listening to. And in many respects, like it's the same pricing behavior with NFTs and crypto more broadly. So I think that like that overlap is a super interesting point that you brought up there, and something that kind of defines the space a bit.
Yeah, and in the same way that we saw DAOs spin up to purchase pieces of art or even the Constitution, I'm sure we're going to see music DAOs or fan based DAOs that spin up to buy maybe chunky royalties off of very popular artists. So I'm really excited to see that happen. I guess just to wrap us up here, in terms of your final advice for the artists out there listening to this episode who's thinking of, hey, should I maybe go with Decent and issue my own NFT? What are some of the most pertinent advice that you have for them, or maybe some pitfalls that they should be avoiding?
I think to all artists out there listening, this opportunity to engage with fans, to have some real knowledge of who your super fans are, who's there wanting to support you, on the front lines of that effort, I think is a really great opportunity. Also being able to hold on to a larger portion of your earning power. We really ultimately, we know our mission is to empower artists. Our mission is to help with that issue of, I guess, imbalance within the incumbent industry. And if we can, build a system and get momentum behind a system that is giving leverage back to the artists, I think that's something that's going to be extremely powerful. So we'd love to work with any and all of you out there that are excited about that mission.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the show, guys. If people want to reach out to you, what are the best channels for them to do this?
Awesome. Thanks for having us, Jason. I think the best place to find us is probably on Twitter at DecentXYZ. You can also check us out on our website at decent.xyz. And, to find a bit more information, we have our Medium page linked to the site so you can, read about what we've been up to.
Yeah, join our Discord, hit us up. And DMs are always open on Twitter. We're excited to hear from some people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.